Welcome to week 4, where we will be covering module 4. And so for this week, the chapters that you're going to be working on are chapter 7, which is liking, love, and other close relationships, as well as chapter 8, social influence. So let's look at the to-do list here. Pretty standard. I really hope that everybody's listening to the podcasts, mainly because I kind of give you clues as to what order to go in as you're working through the material, and just really helpful to point out any things that you need to be aware of for the week. So if we look really quickly at the chapter objectives for chapter 7, basically we're taking a look at relationships from all viewpoints. Okay, so we're going to start with attraction, looking at why people are attracted to others and how specifically, what promotes affiliation with others. So some of those key characteristics of why do we want to affiliate with other people. I think I've said it before, that we're just social creatures. We crave social connection. So there's definitely some different perspectives that speak to why that is. And the better part of the beginning of the chapter will cover that. We'll look at characteristics that influence attraction and affect the emotions that go along with attraction, the types of things that might ensure that we are more attracted to others, like proximity and repeated exposure, and then look a little bit at how we evaluate others on the basis of physical attractiveness. Contrary to what we often think, we're not super objective when it comes to physical attractiveness. I mean, most of us can agree on certain aspects of beauty, but it is subjective, right? I think what's interesting are the parts that are the ones that we agree on. It's like, why, even across cultures, do we see certain things as beautiful? And what does that mean when we see something as beautiful or someone as beautiful? Do we also attribute other characteristics and values to a person if they have outward physical attractiveness or beauty? So here is also where some of the work that we did on stereotypes can play a role. We have different stereotypes about physical attractiveness that can affect whether or not we see someone as beautiful or handsome or what have you. So we'll be taking a look at that, and then getting a little more into the middle of the chapter where it discusses more of the close relationships and romantic relationships. So what kinds of people attract to one another? How do we determine attraction? There's some different hypotheses like a repulsion hypothesis and matching hypothesis, which help to explain why we may choose our mates. A lot of it actually goes back to evolutionary theory and the evolutionary perspective. So we're thinking a lot here about kin selection, passing on desirable traits to our offspring, and all of that. We'll also be looking at different attachment styles, specifically with parents. Research definitely shows that how we attach to our parents is very predictive of how we attach to close others later in life, whether that be good friends or romantic relationships. And so those early attachment styles really set the stage for the later success and or failure of those later relationships. So then we'll dive a little bit more into romantic relationships, the types of romantic relationships we can have and how that differs from close friendships. We'll look at the triangular theory of love and the different types of combinations of love that Sternberg proposed, and then end with the role of jealousy, threats to relationships, as well as conflict resolution, which I actually think the last part of this chapter is the most important. How do we deal with conflict in our relationships? And what types of styles even do we see people gravitate towards, specifically gender-based styles? We see some gender differences pop out in just how we relate to one another and how we fight and all of that. So that will cover chapter 7. Chapter 8 is another really loaded chapter. There's a lot here. It's social influence, which is a big area of social psychology. It includes some of the most prominent and influential studies done in the field. Some of the very early work in social psychology was in this area of social influence. How are we influenced by others? And how do we influence others? So we'll be looking first at social norms for how we act and why we act, setting the stage for how that all functions. But primarily the key components in this chapter that we'll be looking at are conformity, compliance, and obedience. Those are the three kind of huge areas. So with conformity, why do we conform to others? When are we more likely to? We'll be taking a look at Solomon Asch's famous studies of conformity and what he found. And what kinds of things affect conformity? So group size, the cohesiveness of the group, the various norms that operate and kind of tell us how we should behave. Or how we might behave in a given situation. And these all ride on normative social influence and informational social influence being the two key sort of routes that we take when we're deciding how things are going to influence our behavior or judgments and decision making. And so that's all sort of the area of conformity. And then we'll move into compliance, which is going along with a direct request, right? Compliance is like following along with what somebody wants. And we may do this because we want to be a part of a group, because something's riding on it. If we don't, we want to be accepted, we want to be liked. So we might comply for many different reasons. And there's ways that other people can get us to comply, get us to do what they want. Persuasion is definitely a part of that. So some of the earlier work that you've read in previous chapters will definitely come into play here. But we'll be looking at 6 basic principles of compliance. And this is the work of Cialdini, Robert Cialdini. And this is also really big in business and fields like marketing and advertising. Use these principles to understand market trends, to do market analysis, to know what buying behaviors are like, and how to be successful in those fields. So this is an area that overlaps very much so with business, but can shed some light on a lot of other different areas like criminal justice, sociology. We'll end the chapter talking about Milgram's early work, his seminal work on obedience. Obedience is like when you're given a command, right, an order by a parent, by a boss, by a commanding officer, someone in an authority position, right? So a position of authority is telling you to do something. Do you do it? What is going to influence whether or not we listen? We don't always listen to authority. Sometimes we don't and we should. Sometimes we do and we shouldn't. So there'll be a lot of talk about when it is right to obey, when it's not right to obey, what are the consequences of each, and what is also destructive obedience, i.e. when obedience is not good. And we see many examples of that. And so if I can skip really quickly, you'll see that the videos for the week are broken up by chapter. So we have, this goes along with chapter 7. It talks about proximity and mere exposure effect in how we are attracted to others. This is a cool video on the science of attraction. It's very well done, interesting little sample study, and touches on the halo effect. And then we have Sternberg's triangular theory of love pointed out and some good components there. That's all chapter 7, and then a great deal spent on chapter 8, where we do a crash course in social influence. This is a quick one. And we have some Khan Academy videos again. This one's on conformity and obedience, understanding the difference between the two and elements of each. We have Ash's original study on conformity. And then we have Milgram's original full documentary study on his obedience experiment. And so this is the full original documentary. It's really interesting. What I want you to do is compare this to the modern day take on the Milgram study. Jerry Berger did this study in California. It was done in, I want to say, the early 2000s. And he wanted to know, like, would Milgram's findings still hold up today? His study also included women, so you'll get to see some gender differences, whereas Milgram's study was all men. It was done in 1962. So you're going to be comparing these, and that's actually going to be part of your discussion question for the week. Then I put some fun ones on conformity from Brain Games. This is on social norms. It's the Free Hugs campaign that happened a little while back. And then the last video, second to last video I have for you is on persuasion tactics and using social influence in the military, looking at obedience within that realm and obedience gone wrong with the Abu Ghraib prison atrocity, as it's known as, and how it mimics a lot of the findings from the Milgram study, just in real life, in a real situation. And then we have some stuff on emotional branding, and this goes along also a lot with persuasion tactics and techniques that you'll be reading about in Chapter 8. So all of that will be going into your discussion question, but before you even try to start those discussion questions, you'll want to make sure you go over the lecture slides that are here and that you do the article readings. Article 19 goes along with Chapter 7, and Article 26 goes along with Chapter 8. All of that should be integrated into your answers to the discussion, which this week we're looking at attractiveness and how it's represented in the media today. That's with Article 19 and Chapter 7. You want to be integrating in there. And then question 2, you're going to integrate Article 26 and Chapter 8, where I'm having you look at the Milgram study and looking at it through the lens of obedience. Also talking about that Abu Ghraib prison video and how does it mimic the Milgram video, and what do you think about that? That's your discussion for the week. Remember, work through all of this, at a good pace. You shouldn't really be starting that discussion until maybe Thursday or Friday, until you've really had a chance to get through all this material, because 2 chapters is a lot to digest, and I just want to make sure you have enough time to do that before you're trying to start these videos. Discussion and getting into that. And when you feel ready, then you're going to take your exam 4, which covers chapters 7 and 8. So that's the content for the week. Again, please ask if you have any questions. Get an email every now and then just with little questions about things, which is great. It can help you one-on-one. Do be watching the videos also that are embedded in the e-text, as you're reading. There's some videos in there in Revel. Those are great. They often elucidate other concepts that I might not cover, I might not discuss, or I might not have videos on. And again, use these chapter objectives to help you study before you take the test. And remember, your discussion board questions are due by Friday, your answers to the questions, and then you have until Sunday to respond to your peers and respond to 3 other people's comments, okay? Again, integrating in all that you've read and watched for the week. And that wraps up the week, everybody. Hope you all have a great week.